like if you and I were going to go to the gym this morning and I knew you would be there, then I will also be there. But if you text me last night and said, hey, I'm not going to make it tomorrow morning, I'm not feeling good, well, I'm not going to go then, right? Because I was willing to show up for other people, but I wasn't willing to show up for myself. And so those habits of failing to show up for myself eventually built and compounded in a negative fashion. And I realized, like, okay, I've got to do something different here to be able to show up for myself like I do for other people, because I can't be the best father or the best husband if I'm not the best for myself first, right?
Dadhood, I be repping dadhood. Let's go.
All right, Dadhood, we have Cody in the house, my man. I'm so excited for this episode 1. Been checking out your stuff on social, and just from a personal level, I'm like really excited to dive into it and to learn more about some of your mind sets and that the growth mentality and just how that correlates into multiple facets of your life. But yeah, thank you so much for jumping on today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited.
So Cody, the listeners at home right now, how about you just give like a high level perspective, like what makes Cody tick? Like what's your jam?
What makes me tick is probably competition. I grew up playing sports my whole life, and no matter what it is, if we're walking to the mailbox or playing foosball or cornhole, whatever it is, I love to compete. And so I'd say that I always look for ways to compete, whether with other people or even with myself.
Okay. So do you find yourself like competing even with your family? Do you compete a lot with them?
Oh yeah, I like to make the joke that I'm the undisputed Guess Who champion of the world in my household. So no one in my house has ever beat me in Guess Who, and one day my kids will figure it out and they'll get there, but they're gonna have to earn it.
Yeah, I love that. You can't just give them a handout. I mean, if you dominate at something, dominate, because then if they genuinely beat you, you can be like, hats off, like good job.
Well, absolutely. My kids are young, so my son is 6, my daughter's 9, and I think that what you see in society is that we try and shelter our kids from like difficulties and pain. And I think oftentimes we're doing that for ourselves because it's hard to see your kids struggle. And so when you stop them from struggling, you're really helping yourself and you're hurting them. Because if they don't learn how to overcome obstacles when they're young, because by the time you're 7, most of like your core beliefs are ingrained in your mind. And so if we don't teach them at a young age how to lose and how to win and how to overcome obstacles, we're really making it difficult for them in adulthood. And so it's like if you shelter your kids all through adolescence, and then when they become 18, they get their first job and they get their first criticism or their first failure, they're not going to know how to react. And so I think that we've done a real disservice for youth and trying to protect them from losses and the participation trophies and all of that stuff. I think you've got to let kids thrive in their wins and their losses.
Sure. Do you feel like growing up, you were given that space to like just fail and to
Oh,
grow?
absolutely. I like I said, I grew up playing sports, and my dad was my coach for most of my sports. But I was not naturally talented at anything, and so like all of my sports teams were good because my collective group of friends was really good, and my dad was a great coach, and my friend's dad who also coached with him was a great coach, and so we were always very successful as a team. But I had to work really hard to earn my spot to even be able to play, and so there's championship games where I didn't even get in, even though my dad was the coach, because if I didn't earn the right to play, I wasn't going to get to.
So that's really interesting. I'd like to talk about that for a second. So that whole notion, your dad's the coach, or I've had CEOs that their kids work in their companies and stuff like that. And the expectation on other members of the team is that you just are given an opportunity because you're dad. But you were just even
Right.
saying dad would even be like, you're not cutting it. You're just not going to play, right?
Yeah, I actually remember it was 6th grade. I grew up in Wyoming, and we were playing in a league in Colorado because the competition was better, and it was a championship game. And my dad put me in, and I was like super excited to be in the championship. And he took out our best player, and then he subbed me right back out. I was in for a free throw and then came out, and I realized he only subbed me in so we could talk to the best player and like run like write down the play. And then and he probably did it to me because he knew I could handle it. Where if he put some other kid in and did that his parents might be upset, the kid may be upset. And so I still remember that. But it wasn't, I don't remember it as a negative. I remember it as an opportunity where I had to really work hard to earn the right. And so when I did, and I earned my playing time, it was so much more rewarding. And I probably wouldn't have had the work ethic to get good enough had I just been given the opportunity, because I wouldn't have had that desire to work for something.
Do you think that's like, I'm really fascinated in that. Do you feel like that's something innately that that's just like programmed in your own mind? Like, I'm going to look at this situation from a higher perspective? Or was that like work you put in, like as an adult to be like, oh, those moments really weren't happening like against me, they were happening for me kind of mentality?
That's a great question. And looking back on it, like certainly as I've progressed in life and I've read more and I've become more educated and have a deeper understanding of things, certainly that's evolved my philosophy. But even if I think back to being a kid, I don't ever remember like having that victim mentality of like, oh, poor me. It was so I guess it was ingrained in me because I didn't ever see it that way. And I think I also had enough awareness to know like they were better than me. So it's not like I felt like I was better than them and I wasn't getting the opportunity. I knew that they were better than me. And so I was okay having to work to earn the right to be there. Um, I guess I didn't want anything given to me. I wanted to earn it.
So if you notice that with like your son and your daughter, like if they're like on a competition team or whatever, and like they come to you and they're like, but dad, this person's so much better than me. Like, what are some of those responses now, knowing that you give, like as far as advice to them?
Well, so when my son started playing basketball, he was on this team with a group of kids who'd been playing. So he's only 6, but these kids had already been playing for like 2 years. This family had a basketball court in their house. So like they are always playing and they have all these cousins and all these brothers. And so like they're just exposed to competition at a higher frequency than my son was. And I can remember the very first practice, we were doing a drill where they had to dribble down the court and try and score. And then the other kid tried to steal it from him. And my son got it stolen. I could see that look of like devastation on his face, like he wanted to cry right then. And but he held it in and he went through practice, and then in the truck on the way home he was saying like, dad, I don't want to play basketball. I'm not as good as these kids. And I said, well, son, you can't be as good as them because they have a 2-year head start on you. Like you can't compare yourself to them today when they're already 2 years into the journey. Like you have to understand that you're going to have to practice and play just as much as they did to be as good as them. And if you want to become better, you're going to have to do even more than they have done. And so don't look at it as like there's some deficiency in you or you were lesser than. It's all about how much work you've put in and how much effort you've done. I said, so if you want to be better, then we're just going to have to practice. And then I just shared with him my story of of being a kid, not being very, naturally, and my son's more naturally talented than I was. So he's got that going for him, but he's still going to have to put in the work because these other kids that are doing it are naturally going to be better because they've got the exposure.
No, that's so good. I think that's important to realize too. Like, I love that you said your son already has more natural ability. Isn't it interesting as like fathers when we look at our children, your daughter, your son, whoever it is, and you're just like, man, they are so much more advanced than I was, or so much
Yeah, it's interesting.
skilled in this field than I ever
Yeah,
like even am now today. You know?
yeah, it's interesting. It's
It
fun.
is. For sure. So let me ask you because I'm really fascinated about your book, right? So
Sure.
winning the moment. So where did this come from, and like how did this all come to life, basically?
So, I mean, it started like my desire to compete and to win, and the value of winning and losing. We kind of losing. We kind of talked about started in my childhood, and I just kind of carried that competitive spirit into my professional career. And so I really kind of gamified everything that I did. So like in my first sales job, sales was like a game, and it was a competition, and I would get so many sales and you'd get so many sales and you competed against each other. And so I found out how I was being graded or scored, right? Like however the company determined who was better or not, and became really good at that thing. And that propelled me to professional success. And I got a place in my life where I succeeded at everything that I did professionally, but I was falling short individually.
Hmm.
So like if you and I were going to go to the gym this morning and I knew you would be there, then I will also be there. But if you text me last night and said, hey, I'm not going to make it tomorrow morning, I'm not feeling good, well, I'm not going to go then, right? Because I was willing to show up for other people, but I wasn't willing to show up for myself. And so those habits of failing to show up for myself eventually built and compounded in a negative fashion. And I realized, like, okay, I've got to do something different here to be able to show up for myself like I do for other people, because I can't be my the best father or the best husband if I'm not the best for myself first, right? And
Hmm.
so how can I fix that equation? And so being competitive and loving tracking things and reward systems, I just built a spreadsheet that tracked all the things that were most important to me, and I did that in 2019. And I had this incredible year where I lost 40 pounds and I read a bunch of books and I really blossomed personally. And that carried over into 2020. But then in March of 2020, when COVID hit, my company, Vibrant Management, is a hospitality based company. And so we were really devastated by COVID. It almost took us out of business. And so in that moment, I allowed myself to be a victim a little bit, and I kind of I stopped all that positive momentum. And momentum works in a lot of ways, like the stock market, right? It's a slow, steady build to the top, but it can go down to zero instantly. As soon as you stop, then you got to start that climb all over again. And so I was faced with this obstacle of having to struggle to get started. And so I thought, how can I bring that spreadsheet to life? And I'd been reading a bunch of books on psychology and willpower and how that affects us throughout the day. And so I realized there's about 10 good decisions in a day that you can make that'll sway the course of your day. And so that's what I wear these bracelets for. It's like this morning I've moved over 5 bracelets so far. So I've won 5 moments. And I realized that I needed to stop looking at things as a definitive, like I'm going to exercise every day for the rest of my life. Or I'm going to read 10 pages every day for the rest of my life. Because what would happen is if I missed a day, then I felt like a failure. And then I kind of just quit. And so I needed to change my mind to think about I don't have to exercise every day for the rest of my life. I just have to exercise this morning. And so it's about just being present and being in the moment. And if you continue to stack those wins and you build that momentum for yourself, then you can create the winner effect, which is a psychologically proven concept that when you win, it builds endorphins and dopamine in your mind, and you believe that you will win more as the day progresses, right? And so you're just creating this positive momentum in your life. And so I'd always wanted to write a book my whole life, and then I kind of thought of this concept, and I happened to just have a publisher reach out and say they were interested in hearing my story, and I shared this concept, and they thought it was a good one. And 2 years later, January 3rd of this year, the book came to reality, which is pretty exciting.
Dude, congratulations on that. That's a big win in itself. I mean, a lot of people, um,
Absolutely.
you know, I reflect on this because now, obviously, with technology where it's going and like AI being able to write,
Yeah.
people are writing books and all this stuff, and I get it.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it's an amazing tool, and if you leverage it
Yeah.
right, it's unbelievable. It can help you be more efficient, right?
Absolutely.
But you are still the byproduct of what you're trying to create. You are
Yeah.
still the key recipe, right? So again, just congrats on that. That's a huge win. I am extremely fascinated because I feel like I also went through a period of my life. Naturally, I'm competitive as well, but went through a period where it was just easy, like serial, like quitting, I guess you would call it. Like the right answer, but you're like, not going to put the full work in to do it.
I think that we all do that, right? Like nothing, there's not a lot of answers we don't have. We just choose not to do them. It's like I like to say having a six pack isn't a mystery. Like we know the ingredients to have one. I just have never done it because I obviously don't care enough, right? But it's not like I'm unaware of how to accomplish it. I know exactly what I have to do it, but am I willing to put in the work to do it? And I think a lot of times we think we want something, but if our habits and our actions aren't indicative of that thing, then we're just lying to ourselves, and we either don't want that thing bad enough, or we're saying we want it because we think society is telling us that we're supposed to want it. And so we're just echoing that sentiment. And that's why you've really got to do that self-discovery. It's like, what do you really want? Because if you truly want a thing and you've defined your purpose, then it's easier to work towards it. The problem is too often we get started in life and we're just going in the direction we think we're supposed to go without ever taking any time to decide where we actually wanted to be headed.
So, do you think on this also you have this great idea or a great plan? Obviously, you want to make strides towards it. So, you're creating mini wins throughout the day of something you can just say, I'm just doing this today,
Yeah.
taking the armbands off or putting them on. Um, is that also creating a space where you're not having to focus so much on the result? You're just saying, this is what it is
Yeah.
today, right?
Right, because if you do the right habits every day, then wherever that end destination is you're striving for, you're absolutely going to get there. It just depends on what the thing is. It might take 30 days, it might take 90 days, it might take 365 days, it might take 10 years. But if you're putting in all the habits every day, then it's impossible to not arrive at the place that you're striving to get towards. And I think it's important to have that Jim Collins and Good to Great, the big hairy audacious goal. You need that. Like you want to be thinking in terms of where am I ultimately trying to get headed, and I like to say that we should think of it in terms of 3 years, because we have a tendency to overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but underestimate what we can accomplish in 3 years. So I like to think about like, okay, where do I want to be 3 years from now, and know where I'm trying to arrive. But all I'm going to focus on is the moment, because the only thing that's real is the present time. right? Whatever happened yesterday, even if I failed and I wasn't successful yesterday, there's no point in dwelling on it any longer because it already happened and I can't change it. There's also no point in worrying about what I'm going to do tomorrow because the only thing that's real is right now. And so that's what I'm really trying to do is pull people to the present moment and not be worried about like, well, I've got a party on Friday night and I'm trying to not drink and they're going to ask me if I want a cocktail. What am I going to do? I'm not going to worry about Friday right now. I'm just going to worry about today.
Yeah, I love that so much because that reduces a lot of unnecessary anxiety and stress too with that
Yeah.
future focus. Tell me about how many times have you started winning the moment and realized that that goal or objective that you were going for wasn't really that goal objective, but or the thing that you actually wanted in your life, but because you started the process, it opened up an opportunity for a new idea, new habit, new.
Yeah, I think that's natural. When you're doing good things happen. And maybe it's not even the intention of it, right? So it's like maybe